All right, here we go. This is the System Failure Podcast number 68. What's going on, Nate?
Hey, Brian, number 68, a great number. We have a special guest for the intrepid System Failure listeners today. In the studio, we have, as you all out there may have heard, there is a third not brother, or a second not brother, if we're going sequentially. And so we have for you today our middle brother, Jason. Say hello to the good people out in the System Failure audience ship. Jason.
Hey, what's up, good friends? Or what do you have like? Do you have a name for your fans? Are they failures? Or?
We need a name for our fans. We haven't. Yeah, we could call them failures. I like that. That's pretty good. And just to raise the curtain on the System Failure Studios a little bit, so we recorded recently with our good friend the Captain, and before that episode, I forgot to bring the third mic from my house, and so as the more astute among you may have noticed, we did 3 people with 2 microphones. And we have a little bit of a similar situation today. We've got our third microphone, but we have a 4th person in studio, and that would be Jason's lovely wife, Grace, who is here also. Grace, if you would be so kind as to greet our listeners.
Hi, hello. Nice to meet you.
Jason, we had a couple of reasons, a couple of ulterior motives for luring you into studio today. I'll start with the first. Well, I'll lay them both out there, and then we'll start with the first one. The first thing is that probably 20 years ago now, I want to say, a long time ago, back when I was in my hardcore atheist phase, and before I'd ever heard the name Carl Jung, you were banging on about the importance of narrative structure, and not just narrative structure, but its fundamental nature to the reality we experience. So we'll get into that, but the other part of the second half of this pod will be dedicated to the fact that you and Grace, Jason, are pregnant and expecting your first child within 2 months here. Do you have an exact delivery date for us?
Well, they say the 27th, but it's really plus or minus 10 days or more. It's not an exact science. We just kind of do it.
So more or less 2 months out.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
So we wanted to get you in studio, Jason, to interview you and, of course, your lovely wife, and figure out, we wanted to get you all on record before, pre-partum and then postpartum, interview you and find out how profound the changes in your brain chemistry have been as a result of this event. So I'm looking forward to this. And to pull the curtain back just a little further, the Knot Clan, I'm 41. Jason, your birthday is tomorrow. You'll be 39, if my math is correct.
That's correct.
And Brian, you're 35.
I'm 36.
I knew that. Brian's 36, of course. And so I just bring this up to mention that your child will be the first one that the Knot Clan has managed to muster here. We aren't exactly... There are some families, like I think of like Tiger, families, they're like lethal when it comes to, we're more like late bloomers. So that's why this is such a fascinating experience, going to be such a fascinating experience for you guys. And for us by proxy, we're going to also be very fascinated to watch how this all plays out for y'all. So I thought maybe we could start with narrative structure and its fundamental, and how fundamental it is to the nature of reality. And I think maybe the way to get started with that, Jason, is to talk about the fact that you are a film student and went to school for film and love movies.
Yeah, that 20-year moment ago when you talked, you mentioned I was in the heat of film school, and I now have that degree, and I don't do anything in regards to that degree whatsoever. It's not informed my business or career so much, but it was surprisingly to me, I guess, an interesting philosophical endeavor. You take in just an enormous amount of media, but mostly of narratives, short form and in part, I became one of those people at my peak where you could be watching a movie or even sit down in the middle of a movie and start to see the Lego bricks of the construct before you and start to predict what was about to happen, pretty fine-tooth comb, and that was very fun for me, probably very unfun for people nearby, but you don't just study 2010 film when you're in 2010 film school. You're looking back to the first films came out in the 20s really, and they were 8 minutes long. And so we have a pretty finite amount of art to look at when you're talking about moving picture. And so we take it all in. I wrote a long paper on about Alfred Hitchcock, I suppose, but the horror, I guess, as a genre. Hitchcock didn't really do horror, but he did like spawn a lot lot of like 80s horror movies. But
I think of suspense when I think about Hitchcock, right?
Sure.
It's like
Suspense
it's more
thriller.
about what your own imagination can. You did like your thesis on Hitchcock, no?
For
Is that
sure,
right?
yeah,
okay.
that's the paper I'm talking about. So, but yeah, so he like The Birds is a horror movie, right? People are in town, they get attacked by the birds. There's no particularly good reason for it. It's just about running away from a monster. But the monster's not a clever monster. It's just a really familiar one, and that's his idea. But then, the 80s genre of horror kind of came out of that. The first half of The Birds is a romance drama. Two people are in town. They're kind of chasing each other. And in the background, you just start to notice the birds collecting. The second half of the film is structurally identical to The Night of the Living Dead, the George Romero zombie movie. And I couldn't find him saying that he did that on purpose anywhere. And you can find longer cuts of Night of the Living Dead that have a lot of material that didn't make it in there. So I kind of assume that he didn't intentionally recreate the second half of The Birds beat for beat, so much as intentionally and unintentionally kind of coalesced the same structure out of thin air, or cultural thin air, or mimetic ether.
Forgive me, for I have not seen Romero's classic Night of the Living Dead. What's the name of the Romero's Night of the Living Dead?
Night of the Living Dead.
Is it like Skyfall and Home Alone? That's the end of The Birds, right? They they hold themselves up in a cottage and defend against the birds, isn't that? Or like Signs, one of these movies where you're trapped in a room.
Yeah, absolutely. So they find themselves cornered back into a seemingly abandoned cottage. They find that there's another person in the cottage. They find that the second floor has a body that's been destroyed by whatever monster. This is both movies, by the way. And they end up holding up in the basement. They reinforce the exterior of the building, which with limited success. And at the very end, during a moment of calm, they sort of gather their wounds together, and they sort of sneak out and just make a break from the cottage without ever solving the larger global problem. There is some media in the background that suggests all sorts of things, but both movies suggest that a satellite containing some sort of nuclear material has fallen from the sky and maybe is causing this problem, but nothing conclusive.
The Birds suggest that?
It does. Well, I believe so. Or maybe it's radio waves, but they suggest some sort of there's a lot of fear in the air at the moment for the last century was marked by a rise of science into the common knowledge. The popular zeitgeist saw even your Lovecraft in the 20s was reacting to an influx of information in astronomy. All of a sudden, the average person knew a little something about the stars and what was going on up there. And he was reacting to lots of things, but that was certainly one of them. Pop science was a thing for the first time in the early 1900s. Communication was on the rise. We suddenly have radio, and the printing press starts disseminating knowledge long before that. But it's it starts at the most important things. You're sort of politics and religion and all that, and it worked its way down. And about the 1900s, all of a sudden, we were getting fiction that incorporates new scientific ideas. Fiction was limitedly popular before that. Obviously we have your Charles Dickens and so on. These but they all have these names about them. Even in the 20s they were called pulp because they're printed on super cheap paper called pulp. And then dime store novels, and then Harlequins, and even Charles Dickens didn't publish novels. He produced almost chapter by chapter and published
serials,
them in magazines. Yeah. Serials, yeah. Stephen King released The Green Mile in that same way, just because he was mirroring Dickens and wanted to see if he could write one chapter at a time without knowing where he was going. And so kind of all of these things are intertwined. The people who are making this work aren't just sitting down and pulling stories out of the ether. Well, I guess they are, the cultural ether they are, but not out of their own butts,
Yeah. There's an existing what seems what appears on its face to be a blank canvas of creativity is actually a canyon with a river flowing through it. That has been predetermined, or people don't realize that your narrative structure is derivative of prior narrative structures, and that were very limited. We when we were growing up, right? We for whatever reason, I was really obsessed with movies, like you were, Jason. I wasn't allowed to watch a PG-13 movie until I was exactly 13 years old, and then we're all allowed to watch PG-13 movies. So we had a big backlog to work with. I spent elementary school like pretending that I'd seen Ace Ventura, but I hadn't really, because it was PG-13. So when I finally got my mitts, when Blu-ray technology came out late in our high school careers, and I finally got my hands on it, I started collecting Blu-rays like some kind of a lunatic. Not Blu-rays, DVDs. And I got to about 100 of them. And then I really started to get bored with movies. I was like, all of the differences between the movies fell away, and all I could see was the similarities between every one of those, all 100 of those DVD cases. And I swapped them out for like a couple of Blu-rays. And then I got to about 12 or 13 Blu-rays, and I was like, wait a second, let me not repeat the same mistake. But the point here is that, to me, what you had said all those years ago when we were talking about narrative structure, before I ever heard of Carl Jung, was something about like Michelangelo's. Like, I think about Michelangelo looking at a solid, rectangular block of marble, holding up the one thumb and closing one eye, and looking at that block of marble, and what he's seeing is David trapped inside the marble, and he has to be sprung, to freedom by use of the hammer, Michelangelo's hammer and chisel. And that so many things happen in reality that we have to discard that extra stone that's not part of the vision that we're trying to see for ourselves. So things that don't fit whatever narrative structure you believe you're living out, you forget. And things that match that narrative structure, you remember clearly, so that you end up like Michelangelo, starting with a block of raw reality and whittling and shaving it down to create this arc-shaped story that that's how we all perceive our lives. Does this sound vaguely familiar? Like this is kind of like the point I think you were making all those years ago.
Sure. Yeah. It's a little bit Dawkins mimetic theory. It's a lot of it. We grew up on Star Wars, and somewhat famously, George Lucas was enamored of the Hero of a Thousand Faces, I think. Yeah.
What's the name of the guy that wrote that book? He was an American psychologist in the first.
Conrad?
It's an annoyingly common name. It's like Joseph Campbell.
That's the one. There it is.
Okay,
Yeah. Okay. Good. I wasn't so far off with Conrad.
The Hero of the Thousand Faces, George Lucas's famous book that prompted him to create the Star Wars film of 1977.
And so the idea is just that, like, you can... A New Hope, the first movie, is chapter 4, and the idea is just that you can start in medias rise, and we will already understand the original Star Wars trilogy is this story of a fallen order of like white knights that rise, and Luke is able to like rise them from the ashes and confront the great evil Darth Vader, and that's like an extremely familiar story. Beowulf does that. King Arthur does that. Like, it's just over and over and over again.
All the archetypal pieces are there, right? You've got the Dark Lord, you've got the protege, you've got the mentor. I mean, you name it. You've got the Han Solo sort of. Oh yeah. The call to action is that you're really getting into Jungian psychology now. But the call to action is a critical part of this whole mental structure that is the narrative.
And even then, that's the hero story. That's only like one of them. Like, there's even more. Like even more granular, like beyond that, like more proto, I guess, tropes, I guess.
What is that? There's like an article from like Tumblr in 2012 or something that's like there's only 8 movie plots or something, and they list them. I don't know if I've ever seen that article. Have you ever seen that one?
It's been a little while, but a more recent one is that there are 2 types of fantasy novels. One where the dragons are gone. And there's no dragons left, and like maybe they'll come back. And the other one is that there's too many goddamn dragons. Like we're overrun with dragons, and then that's mostly true until you start to get into a really weird, sci-fi like books, and fantasy books. But yeah, the tropes are incredibly valuable. You were kind of talking about your rise and fall with movies as you started to recognize the tropes, but most people don't just, I think, latch on to a couple of tropes that they start to hold dear, usually because they were fun in childhood, or you relate to them for one reason or another, but you find a couple of tropes, and so we find stories that tell that story again in a different way that gives a little bit of novelty to like match the familiarity. And that's kind of like what turns the engines of like, just like that's why we write more books at all.
That makes me think of a comment like about the new Disney Star Wars films. Like, to me, it's like Michelangelo created this beautiful statue, the David, and Disney's like, oh, we're going to buy the rights to that and then produce infinite copies of David with minute changes. And it's just like, oh, okay, so what you're doing is taking great art and then making knockoffs of it, right? You're not turning a new vision into the public here. You're copying someone else's vision because you've got that corporate money to throw around.
Well, sure, but that's because you stepped into the river at one point, but the river led up to that as well. Like George Lucas was mimicking American sci-fi serials from his childhood. Your Flash Gordon is probably the most accessible one. Flash Gordon has space wizards. It has a main hero. He happens to be a football player, so it's quite silly. But what he did was like take it seriously. So we like the Star Wars story, and then we get new ones that feel different. Like even George Lucas went back and made a new trilogy of prequels that are the people who grew up on them love them, and the people who grew up on the originals see this as like a crime of some kind. And then because it for a new trilogy, you have to have a new fundamental idea. And so the new trilogy, the prequel trilogy is the story of the Jedi, not as like gleaming, shining knights that were like fending off evil, but as an organization of hubris that is the fall of the Jedi. Like they are doing a bad job and they are destroyed by it. And it just rings fundamentally different. And then so even Disney picks up they're not my favorite. I like lots of things about the movies. I have lots to say about them, but we don't have to do that. Point is that there was like a seed of a good idea there, which is like sort of like after the fact. Like, are we going to resurrect like the White Knight Order? Are we going to like go back to like the old days? But the new movies say that like the old days really is like an illusion, and that we to resurrect the Jedi would be to like create another order of hubris, and we don't have to do that. So they like literally burn the book on a tree. It's a little out of nowhere, but the symbolism is right there. It almost is like a more it almost suggests like a more free form, almost like Buddhist approach to like being a Jedi. Like being a Jedi is about we just watched the old Karate Kid for the first time, and it says karate's in here and in here, heart and head. Like you don't have to. It's not about learning the cool moves and being a part of the order. We don't need badges. Being a Jedi is like a personal self-improvement track, and then fighting for good will come out of like a certain amount of self-improvement, I guess.
Would you agree that Mr. Lucas had a flash of true artistic inspiration with 1977 Star Wars, right? The movie was of course it was a remix of like old fighter pilot movies from World War II and old samurai films and Flash Gordon, as you mentioned. But Lucas, all art has to be comprised of familiar elements arranged in a novel way, right? Because if there's not some continuity, it'll be totally incomprehensible. So for art to be incomprehensible, it has to be a remix of past forms in some sense, but it also has to have novelty in order to make it not just a remix of past forms and nothing more. So in my view, and I just wonder if you agree or disagree, in my view, Lucas had a real strike of artistic ingenuity, or when he created that 1977 Star Wars. It was the perfect parable for post-Vietnam America, right? A plucky rebel alliance striking at a all-powerful empire from its hidden bases, right? It's just the perfect World War II, the perfect Vietnam War era parable. And I feel like Disney has not been able to recreate that, but maybe you would disagree just based on what you were just saying.
I think you're right insofar as the outside of the original trilogy, they've struggled to be as timely. But where I do quibble is that I don't think George Lucas in particular had the flash. Like I think what makes great art, or maybe even high art, I guess, is the conglomeration of like forces like well outside of any one person's capability. The people who told George Lucas, no, that's a dumb idea, are the ones who really fashioned Star Wars. Like you can go back and find like all these different layers of like old versions of Star Wars, and they have just the weirdest stuff in there. Like Luke Starkiller was the original name, and like it's just Han Solo was a frogman, like things that they weren't going to be able to pull off. And
if you look at the other art that was coming out, like there was other like space operas. I mean, there's some others that are like truly terrible. I think maybe I saw them on Mystery Science Theater, which are probably going to be the worst. But just like the quality of the media that was coming out in the 70s. Like one thing we've talked about, I don't know if we've done on the podcast, is like how Jaws is such a great movie. If you just look at the other like lead-fueled machinations of the 70s, a lot of it's just absolute garbage. And so I think that art, it does matter. I mean, Michelangelo, I'm just sure that no one else was making statues like that before he was, and that's why it's a big deal. And to have a recreation of the statue is, I mean, it's kind of cool, but obviously to have seen it for like the first time would be wild. And so, I mean, there's probably like some merit somewhere in like the new Star Wars trilogy.
It's definitely a mining operation to get there. But
Yeah. So I guess I think it just matters how good the art is compared to like what else is going on at the time.
well, yeah, I mean, ideally you make art for the blank canvas audience. They're just going to step into it, which is why I think they tend to be for younger audiences. But I don't know. I don't know enough about statue building. Like, surely there were male form nude statues before Michelangelo, right? Like, so what was great about Michelangelo is a little bit of a mystery to me.
Michelangelo, a noted homosexual, got the musculature. Like David's hand is cocked like this. He got like even this. David's hand is his wrist is cocked up, and he's got like a sling over his shoulder, and his other hand is kind of cocked at the wrist, and it has the he got even the forearm muscle that activates only when your wrist is extended like that. I mean, Michelangelo was a dude who loved the male form like no other, and boy, does it come through. That statue is perfect. It's a really good statue.
Well, I do know one thing about Michelangelo, which is that it's proportionally incorrect because it's meant to be viewed from standing at his feet. So it's actually slightly like V-shaped as far as like
Exactly
realism.
right.
But
The hands are huge. The hands are these huge paws that don't match the rest of the body because the thing was initially supposed to be viewed from on top of the Duomo of Florence, but that wasn't going to be possible. The dome couldn't support that statue, so they put it out front for a while, and now, of course, it's in the Academy of Fine Arts, and they got a replica out front.
okay, well, yeah, but still, like the any like truly great art, I think, is going to take familiar and then like push it farther than what makes art feel transcendent is that it like when it like kind of moves beyond like the individual realm, like when we were growing up, our parents tried to like subject us to like only like the finest of culture and to like excise the rest as best they could. And so we listened to like classical music at a very young age. And I don't know about you guys, but I remember very much not appreciating classical music. It was like something to put on maybe, but like I don't know, in particular understanding or like appreciation for Beethoven. And I still don't. I'm sure I could like get into it. Like it's great music. I recognize it when I hear it. I do think it is like there's some like great chord progressions and like I don't know how to pick apart Beethoven like I do
Give
other
me
things, but
Symphony 7 Movement 2, but give me the Allegretto version off the chain, man. It happened to me. I got an appreciation for classical.
sure. But you got it later though, right?
Yes,
you didn't pick this out in fourth grade.
Yeah.
And
I was
just
more
never
interested
came
in
back.
Sugar Ray, and
And so I think if the only statue you'd ever seen is Michelangelo, you would say there is a guy, and you'd move on with your life. So what you need like the build up to it. You need some appreciation of like statues in order to look at that one and be shocked by its quality, or you need at least to study like the progression of like statues in history, degraded by time though they may be.
I'd like to quibble. Oh, sorry, I thought you were finishing up there. Carry on.
You can approach it any way you want. You can look at modern statues and work your way back to like what's great about Michelangelo as well, or whatever. But I kind of doubt that any like child is struck by Michelangelo's David out of the raw ether.
I actually think I may disagree. I think that a child in say 15th century Florence who saw that statue would be blown away by it. We see photorealism all the time in our day-to-day lives, so it's not shocking to us. But what the David really represents, right, is that you've got your mind, and you've got your mind, and Grace, you've got your mind, and each of our minds is like this chamber, and I can't see what's going on inside all y'all's chamber except through the advent of great art, right? Because something like a good song or a great movie or the statue of David is like this little keyhole, and I can see what was going on in Michelangelo's mind all these centuries later by just putting my eyes on the David. And I think his statue, now that there's copies, we've all grown up seeing it, is in all my art textbooks growing up. I've seen a bazillion pictures of the David. Isn't that Venus de Milo in The Simpsons? The gummy version? Yeah.
There's one where they go and they censor the statue David at the...
Oh, I forgot about that. That's right. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. I forgot what I was raving about. Oh, just that fine art, like what the Italian Renaissance is all about, is an elevation of consciousness and being able to show other people through that little keyhole in between the locked chambers of our consciousness is where the magic of the Renaissance lies, in my view. And I think that people, for people who are used to medieval artwork with its lack of perspective, the realism that the masters of the Renaissance were able to achieve, I think would have stopped any of them dead in their tracks. So this is just what I guess, though. I got no idea.
I'm with you, but you just mentioned that people who are used to medieval, non-perspective, like religious-based art, the transition is like where the appreciation comes from.
You're correct. There is still a context. Yes.
Yeah. Context is everything, and so without losing the thread here, I want to suggest that like hip hop is the most interesting musical art form at the moment. Because it does the two things that art can do. One is that sometimes you hear a beat and it get to you, and that's really nice. But the other thing that it does is that hip hop represents itself as a totality. Like I feel like the great rock albums are trying to make like the singular greatest rock album of all time. Like especially the prog rocks albums are like.
You perceive hip hop as being different?
Fundamentally different. Huh. I think Pink Floyd set out to make the best, most quintessential Pink Floyd album every time, and to like, and in some ways to like invalidate previous works. And so maybe they don't mean to do that, but they're trying to make the singular, like the pinnacle of rock and roll music. But hip hop sees itself as a continuum and as a whole. And so a great beat is one thing, but the lyrics across hip hop are like filled with references to other hip hop songs, their influences.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
They build on each other. Like they are fundamental at creating language that we continue to use. 3 times removed, people who have no interest in hip hop music use language that is developed there. It's like an absolute, like it is a cauldron where like culture is created.
I use hip hop language, and I'm the whitest person in the state of Maine.
It's it's bright in here.
Well, that is an interesting point. Actually, you're talking about context, I presume.
Yeah. So, hip hop music will they'll even take huge pieces of other songs and then reinterpolate them, make them enough their own so that they are both at once recognizable and also slightly original. And then they and will build off of that and then add something of their own selves to it. And so there is like an inherent recognition of like those who came before that isn't built into any other art form that I can see necessarily, which because it's intentional. So like back to George Romero, I have no idea if he is intentionally acknowledging the birds in his movie, Night of the Living Dead, but it is structurally so similar that it's interesting, if not suspicious. Like,
it could have been completely subconscious, right? It could be just the substrate that Romero was swimming. And like what I'm saying is it could have been not a conscious decision on his part.
Totally. Or maybe he looked at the birds and like, that is great. Birds are a dumb monster. What if oozing, gory, dripping corpses were trying to eat you? Like, that would be way better. And then he made the same movie, and like, so be it. I think he hit a home run and like changed the way that we make horror movies, and we continue to see like derivative like comet dust off of that movie like coming out every couple of weeks.
Well, I don't know if I agree. Well, I guess just like with hip hop, I mean the medium is limited in some way, and so if I want to make a nod to Jay-Z or Kanye, it's like really obvious. Whereas, I've watched The Birds and I watched Night of the Living Dead, and I just like never made the connection. Right. But like the Pink Floyd, for instance, though, I mean, like in Breathe, well, they just kind of. Well, Richard Wright just talks about how he stole the chord progression from Miles Davis. That kind of leads into the lyrics. The bow, bow, bow. Anyway.
Totally. I mean, maybe it's just a product of the times and like the hip hop was born out of the sampling machine and the ability to take one thing and have it be straightforwardly that thing. Whereas like if you are writing a new Pink Floyd song and you hear a chord progression you like, you are in the business of recreating it from the ground up in studio. And like that can and has been done in hip hop, but like maybe we're just like starting with more fundamental elements with like traditional. I'm going to call it traditional music played with instruments and minimal technical intervention. The line's obviously very blurry here, but all
right. Well, anyway, with regards to the thread of I guess we're talking about channeling something in the ether and the value of narrative. And so, I mean, I guess either way, I mean, maybe just hip hop does it more directly than other mediums, I guess was what I was saying.
Sure, yeah. More directly, more overtly. But I think there's a value to that, especially if you're in a moment where you're generating more of that genre, and that genre is like bending and creating itself anew every year. and new artists are like entering the field and like seeing room for themselves. Like there's not that much classical music being created every year. I mean, there is if you get the Pulitzer Prize for music. It's usually going to be some sort of like modern symphonic, orchestral music. Somebody really working hard at that, and I will have never heard of it before. But a number of years ago, the Kendrick Lamar album "Damn" won the Pulitzer Prize for music.
Pulitzer Prize? Wow, for Kendrick? That's interesting.
Yeah, because and like not that I can listen to this and just natively like rip it apart, but I and like see the constituent parts and like how it's interwoven and the way that it constructs narrative and storytelling. I had it done for me, and I was floored. If you have any interest, there's another podcast called Dissect, which each season takes an album of hip hop, and it's a music student, and he takes it down to the barest bones, like finds the all of the samples that are being used, the sort of like draws motifs across the entire album, and it's an enormously complex piece of art. It's the podcast that drew my attention to the term Gesamtkunstwerk, which I'm badly mangling, I'm sure, but
Was bedeutet das? What does that mean?
it means total art. I don't know if it translates literally to that, but it comes out of a classical musician, and I forget his name. But
Can you say the word again?
Gesamtkunstwerk.
Gesamtkunstwerk. I don't know what that. Obviously, Werk means work, but I don't know what the rest. Gesamtkunstwerk.
But again, the failures are screaming at their phones. But it's the idea that anything you can do, like if you're writing music, you write notes on a page, and then you hand it off, and it's recreated. But you can control more than that. You can do, the setting. You can write notes in the margin, like fuerto, like with great, play this part with great energy, and and then especially in like the vinyl and CD era, you have album art is like a part of how you like introduce people to the album they're about to hear. So when people see like the black backdrop with like the prismatic light of Dark Side of the Moon, that like sets the mood for the album that you put on. Albums used to be designed around the fact that a vinyl needs to be flipped midway through, and cassettes since then. And like CDs, not as much, but still people would design like albums around like the CD listening experience. And now the single is incredibly popular. So like the album design is not missing, but certainly less of a thing. And so like, even on shorter albums, we'd have like a B-side song and an A-side song, like because it's essentially a single, but it's got two sides, so two songs. And some B-side songs are incredible. If you Google famous B-side songs, you'll find a huge list of songs that you thought were like that we think of as classic, and that at the time were put forward almost as a throwaway.
Well, I was getting a little nervous there because we had made it almost to the half-hour mark in this podcast with nary a Pink Floyd reference. So I saw, Brian, I saw a trickle of sweat coming down your brow there, but fortunately Jason dropped one in, and so now we feel like all is complete with the world. I think also at this point, I just want to, before we move on to childbearing, I just want to double-click on the hero narrative or the hero's journey. It's really a quest narrative, right? The Lord of the Rings is the culmination of this quest narrative. But I just noticed how much that quest narrative. My contention here is that the quest narrative gives rise to the reality we believe we're living in, and my evidence to support my contention is that the quest narrative has been critical to the literature by which entire civilizations define themselves. Obviously, the Homer jumps off the page as the immediate obvious example, the Odyssey, right? He's got this guy who goes on a long voyage, he goes through ups and downs, but eventually he arrives home at Ithaca, and to find even more drama, but that's the point. Odysseus has to go through this long journey. Now, when the Greek civilization fell because it was conquered by the Romans wanted a similar story to anchor their civilization, right? The Greeks, Mycenaean civilization defined itself by the Trojan War. And the Romans wanted to define themselves with reference to Greek civilization. And so the great Roman poet Virgil created this Aeneid, in which he took his character Aeneas, who was a prince of Troy, and gave him a similar hero's journey on the way back from the Trojan War, but this hero, instead of going to Ithaca, obviously arrives in Rome to found Rome as the first kings of the Roman monarchy around 500 BC. And then when it came time for, and then in the late Middle Ages, you had Dante take that same idea and have another. Now you have Dante who's treating himself as the pilgrim, and his guide, his sage, is none other than Virgil, the Roman poet who created the hero's journey that defined Roman civilization. Is because the late medieval society was obsessed with going back in time. You got to think these people were living amongst the ruins of the Roman Empire. Right? They could see these mighty aqueducts and they had to walk around them every day, but they knew that their own society was not technologically sophisticated enough to recreate those aqueducts. That's a humbling feeling, and that weird feeling of living in the ruins of an old civilization was something that Tolkien imbued into the Lord of the Rings with great effect. But anyway, Dante took all of that and created another narrative where obviously his pilgrim, aided by Virgil, has to go into hell to ascend through purgatory to paradise. And so my contention here, and I'd love to hear what you think, Jason, my contention here is maybe this has to do with our hunter-gatherer backgrounds. Maybe there's just something about being a hunter-gatherer that lends itself to this kind of quest narrative. And one example might be, I noticed that like leopards just sit in the baobab tree all day, and they do, except for when they're chasing down their prey, right? When they exercise when they're about to get their quarry, but they spend the rest of the day burning as few calories as possible, right? Because on the hot savannas, obviously, every time you chase an animal, that's costly from a caloric perspective, means you have to hunt more, right? So the leopard is the leopard's biological systems make it lazy. It makes it so that the leopard won't move unless it absolutely has to. And I think we got a little bit of that baked into us. I don't know if you guys have ever been lazy procrastinators, but I certainly have. And so I'm wondering if the psychology of the hunter-gatherer isn't a little bit perpetual discontent, perpetually having to move on, perpetually having to eat new foods. You can't just eat the same thing all the time like the leopard can. We have to constant discontent. And maybe our laziness makes it feel like we are not going to be happy unless the plucky Rebel Alliance almost loses in Star Wars, right? It's important to us. We aren't going to enjoy the movie unless they can barely pull it out at the end. So maybe that's a reflection of our own calorie-conserving natures or something like that. Well, whatever the case may be, it does seem like the specifically the hero's journey, the quest is the narrative structure that we seem to build all, like everyone thinks of themselves as the pilgrim in their own story, their own hero's journey. And so I don't know. I wonder what you guys think of that.
Totally, yeah. I mean, everything is everything, right? Like, there's not a singular answer to like why the hero's quest like speaks to us, but like there's lots of narratives. There's like pilgrim narrative. There's like soap opera is probably the most counterpoint I can think of because it's designed to be ongoing, which specifically cuts out a thing that is at the core of all of this, which is death. Like we're like aware, becoming aware of your own death is like a hallmark moment in your life, and it's like a thing that when you have a child, you have to find some way to like introduce them to that idea without freaking them out. And like people are very concerned about that. And often it's like a family pet is like a nice way to introduce that idea. You have a great time. Pets are demonstrably good for you, and they will inevitably like pass away in a couple of years. Like at some point in the child's life, they're going to have to reckon with that death. Before reckoning with your own can be like an upsetting prospect, depending on where you're at in your mind. But we as individuals are individuals insofar as we like recognize that we will come to an end at some point. Like the separation of like the rest of the world from the individual is that I am going to die at some point. There was a point where I wasn't here, and there's a point where I will no longer be here. And that's the first boundary of like every narrative structure is like beginning and end, right? The book has, unless even multiple books, there's a front and there's a back. And the hero's journey is the confrontation with death. Like the first thing that happens to the hero is like the fall. You have to crawl through the mud. You have to like taste a little bit of death in order to become the hero.
Yeah. Only by dragging yourself through the inferno can you ascend through purgatory. Yeah,
exactly. You have to. It's world building. You outline the bounds of your world. The lowest point and the highest point are usually, So we have the Frodo in the Shire, and we have Frodo in Mordor. Like these are the two outer bounds of like Tolkien's world, and everything else exists in a continuum between there. Like Rivendell is nice, but it also has its own violence. But the Shire is idealistic. It it fosters these these joyful, like, pure beings. Like the worst hobbit is only the only one that exists, as far as I can tell, in this is one that was corrupted by the One Ring, the darkest power, and that is Gollum, of course. And we see him, and we even sympathize with him several times. Like, by the end, he's not a pure evil. He's a wretch. Like, he's the opposite of a hero. He's been dragged through the mud and failed, and then Frodo is dragged through the mud and succeeds. And so I like it's I think it's fundamental to the idea of, like, spirituality is you confront your own death. Like, how many, like, spiritual ideals are about, like, coming to terms with your own death, whether it's relatively simply through, like, the idea of, like, a positive afterlife or a negative afterlife, or by, like, abandoning, like, concerns for, like, mortal worlds and more of, like, a Buddhist bent. Like, it's all about, like, confronting, like, that reality, and then everything we do in this life is meant to kind of, like, outlive us, I suppose. Like, not in the day-to-day basis, but, like, as like, we define ourselves by the things that we've built that will outlast us, like house, like artistic legacy, like having a child, and so, like, that is, like, all of those are kind of like the spiritual realm, and, like, and pretty much all spiritual practices I can think of are, like, kind of curved around that idea and, like, built towards it. So I think that is why the hero journey is, like, especially, I'm just going to use Christianity, I guess. Like, Jesus obviously goes through the hero arc. He, like, falls and is tested and then rises up and then is ultimately sacrificed in, like, a great heroic moment that lends a little agency to the rest of humanity to also, like, be heroes in their own life. But you don't have to do that yourself.
And shows the limitations of state power. But that's a totally different thing. Yeah.
I'm sure that's another episode. But then, like a proper, like, structural narrative, like a state religion or even a house religion or whatever, it offers the individual the opportunity to be the hero for whatever reason. Like, whether it presupposes that you've already fallen, like something like original sin, or just the idea of sin in general. Like, you were a child and you don't know any better, but you got to, like, learn to be a better person, to be the shining light. You have to, like, go through the crucible of life, and that lends a little context to your life and allows you to improve on yourself in whatever way you've extrapolated from your belief systems, and feel good and feel like the hero in your own life.
Well, that's just it, isn't it? Like, the narrative acts as, like, the North Star that you guide your ship by. Maybe you're never actually going to arrive there, but you navigate your boat with reference to the North Star.
Yeah, I guess you have, I don't know, your soul, right? It's unclear, like, what your soul means, but I guess there is something to which, you want to be authentic, or, I don't know, Socrates talks about, he has, like, his diamond or something.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like demon, but spelled Daemon, the thing that talks to him, as he explains during his trial.
Yeah, and so I guess I'm unsure about, you have, like, a narrative for your own life, and I'm unsure about the connection exactly between the narrative and the soul, or what have you.
Well, this is a outstanding segue from narrative structures to having a kid. And it's been a common preoccupation on the old System Failure podcast, the tension between our identities as individuals and our identities as iterations of a pattern, right? What are the great cathedrals of Europe if not a demonstration of the power of identifying as instances of a pattern, like waves washing up on a beach? Or said another way, the power of multi-generational strategies for accomplishing things versus, ego-based identity as an individual. And so, so I think that this would be a great time for Jason and Grace to take it away and give us their thoughts on this truly psychedelic distinction between identifying as an instance of a pattern and identifying as an egoic individual, right? The source of all of our suffering.
Yeah. Well, do you feel like your narrative has changed? I guess maybe that's a way to get the ball rolling.
Well, we and almost entirely Grace are still pregnant at the moment.
Almost entirely.
Yeah, I am the toothpick that helps prop this up, but I hope to be a bigger part of things in the future. And so I think the concept of the soul really emerges out of like the sense of identity and like an individuality, and I think that a culture or like society or whatever, well, what have you, the external forces are trying to organize you into like the pattern, and it is our job as the parents, I think, to try to foster a sense of individuality, like the great souls of the texts that talk about souls are given extra special names like the one and the singular, and their sense of individuality is like uncompromised. And so we're going to raise a child, and we're going to try to teach them to be their own selves and have like an incredible sense of self. Like the lack of a sense of self, I think, is.
But there's no way to separate their sense of self and what we expose them to. Like, my own personality is certainly shaped on classic rock from my dad and design sensibilities from my mom. And there's kind of, all of that is bled into each other. So how do you kind of set your kid up to create their own internal world, but also show them all the things that you love?
I think you gotta. I think the key is to acknowledge the decay. Like you read a modern fantasy story, and it is the same story as Lord of the Rings. It is the same story as Star Wars and the Bible, and you're going back. And so we put new stuff on there, and then like a huge amount of that will erode away, and they will have their own sense of like these stories, so you try to give them everything you can. You try to give them like the conglomeration. You try to give them like the hip hop sense of everything. And that knowing that some of it won't translate, some of it's surely wrong, and that some of it will just fall by the waysides. And then when whatever that sort of like crystalline structure is left, that'll be who they are. And
I think a lot of people's personalities are shaped by the positives of their childhood, but also direct opposition of the negatives of their childhood. And I think the most that you can hope is that as your kid grows, that they are drawn more to the positive, and that you're not giving them so much negative to bounce off of. That's like kind of my goal, is that I'd love to net positive overall.
Yeah, try not to overcorrect. If your car's going in the ditch on one side of the road, you don't want to swing the wheel too hard the other way. But that would be my impulse too.
But yeah, I mean, you also hope that they are able to oppose the negative things in their life, and that we're not the source of them necessarily. Like, because your Luke Skywalkers of the world identify a negative influence and oppose it directly, and are like feel strong in doing that. Or he doesn't at first. You got to learn from a mentor. So we hope to be. To say that a parent is like a mentor figure is probably super uncontroversial, but but that truly is the case. And I don't know, we live in this moment of like potential right now. It's all somewhere in the future. And I don't know, we're going to kind of see one foot in front of the other, I guess.
And I think there's a little core of personality in there that no matter how you influence them one way or the other,
right. There's a David in the cube in there already.
Yeah. I mean, we have some lovely nephews, and we saw that. My sister did a really good job kind of raising them.
How old are they, Grace?
They're 7 and 3, and her goal in the beginning was a little bit more gender neutral, kind of put everything in front of them, see what they gravitate towards, and they really. August is he's a boy's boy. Like, he loves anything in the like weapon realm, medieval weaponry. His last Christmas was all like gear based. I just got him like a ninja mask and a balaclava, and like it's just funny, like, no matter what influence you put on a kid, there is a little core of personality.
He's crushing on the second grade girls already.
The archetypes lurk out there, right? Like James Bond and Lord Vader are out there somewhere, right? And we would recognize them if we saw them inside the Matrix. We never will, because they're fictional characters, but we know what their tendency would be in any given situation. We understand what their character profile is like, and so it does seem like the archetypes are out there lurking in the ether or whatever, and that, well, this is what Plato would argue, and all day, every day. Like the archetypes are out there, and they make themselves known, and it's not always something that you put into the mix. It's the archetypes have their own epistemological status, if I can use those words.
Yeah, right. That there's a bleed from all of those archetypes out into, like, I'm just gonna say the natural world, I guess, like the things that aren't bound by like these same like hero structures. Like trees don't have a hero pattern. But they certainly have like changed and become a dominant species on the planet over the last X million years. But like that's just like there are many forces outside of that all kind of like create the outlines of the picture that we get to fill in. And then all of this like culture, all this like DNA is kind of like the bridge, I guess, between these two things, but all create the crystalline structure within, and hopefully it fills out and fills in the gaps nicely without any major holes. But
I feel like if the trees ate via hunting and gathering instead of eating via photosynthesis, that the crucible of Darwinian evolution would have bequeathed unto the tree a similar subconscious cast of archetypical characters and archetypical journees and whatever else. I just think that we get our archetypes from Darwinian competition. So I suspect that trees might, if they, like, just as we have arms for Darwinian reasons, I think we have mental appendages for Darwinian reasons, and I think that graces the thing to which you alluded mere moments ago. Well, the question that I really want to ask you both, that I want to ask you now, and then after Baby Not comes around. So you all have decided to remain ignorant of the gender of the child, right? That's why we keep calling it Baby Not, right? We don't have
Yes, we're waiting for the day for the big surprise.
I think that's pretty cool, by the way, doing old school style. So that's why we've got these gender neutral Baby Not terms. We just don't know. So I want to interview you all now, and then ask you the same question 4 or 5 months down the road. Do you suspect that having this child will fundamentally alter your conceptions of yourselves?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I think there's no way that it won't. Even just carrying the child so far has really altered the perception of the self. This is like, a goal that I've had for a very, very long time, and a goal at one point I didn't think my body was going to be able to complete. So the fact that we're even at the point where I'm physically doing it, I have a whole new conception in relation to my body, and a whole new respect for it, and a whole new kind of mercy for it that I feel like I didn't have before. And then out of that is going to come a little person that we created, and I feel like that is going to totally change the way I think of myself as protector and nurturer. And I've heard from many parents that it's impossible not to parent a younger version of yourself.
That makes sense, yeah.
And try to heal a younger version of you, and then also try to do that without putting too much baggage on the little baby now.
You got to deliver some baggage. Being an imperfect person, you just can't help but be imperfect in all things that you do. That's just the way of it. So, but you just try to keep the baggage load to a minimum. I totally understand that philosophy.
But yeah, absolutely. Perspective is changing every day. What about you?
Yeah, here it comes. The Indiana Jones ball is just starting to crest the horizon there. Like we're moving on from like hopefully we can accommodate and like move on from like feeling like individuals to like feeling like a collective. We have many relationships in our lives, and when you try to acknowledge everyone's individuality in them, and like you practice that with everyone around you. But this is distilled. This is like, ideally, I think you would go through a kind of like death, or like ego death in particular. You break down who you are, and you move beyond the hero's pattern, and all of a sudden your job is to like, provide the narrative structure of a hero. And so we are going to have to, stop striving for like, the hero's pattern and become like the mentor figure. We have to like, let my sense of who I am break down, and make sure that I like see who they are, so that I can appropriately not put too much baggage on them.
It's also hard to know what structure to encourage them to follow. I feel like the markers of success that we were shown when we were children don't exist in the same fashion as they used to. When I was growing up, like college was incredibly important, getting a good job was incredibly important. Having a family of my own was incredibly important, and all of that was impressed upon me that like those were must-dos. And I feel now that like linking all of those things with economic stability feels less like something I can just like cleanly point my child in the direction of. It's very complicated. Yeah,
if to the extent that any of us have kids, we are going to be having them into a world of great change, which is always a little hair-raising, to say the least. But I have a feeling that raising a kid, even in the best of times, has a little hair-raising quality to it, right?
Well, one thing about this day and age, if you grew up in Dickensian times, you probably had no choice but to work in the mine. And in this day and age, I think probably you can just kind of pursue whatever you're good at. And, social media will maybe make it work somehow. So, yeah.
Sure. I mean, like working the corner store and living in a trailer is definitely like preferable to many, many, many lives that have been lived in the past, and that would be considered like scraping by. I think the modern standards, like, but I lost it.
Well, you're all going to have to like. I mean, if you had a child in the the darkest days of Dickensian London, you would at least have a clear world that you could explain to the child. But you all are going to have to do a little more of the ad-libbing and be like, you're going to have to kind of be prepared for many things and kind of forge your own path because the systems that we are familiar with are crumbling all around us almost by the day at this point.
Right. Like to some degree, this podcast is about the end of the world, right? Is
Yes.
that fair?
Yes. System failure, of course, is the name of the podcast.
Yeah. So in literature, we're talking about like the apocalypse genre. And like I've always found that an extremely intriguing genre, and like we even came to it very young. My favorite young child apocalypse movie is The Land Before Time. You should watch that movie again. It's about the end of the world. The world is shattered in like volcanoes, and like we as young paleontologists also know that they suffer a little meteor damage later, but his family is destroyed. His like social unit is destroyed, and Littlefoot has to like rebuild it with like carnivore dinosaurs and like dinosaurs of all like caste and breed, and builds a new family, and like when I was in high school, I very much liked George Romero's second zombie movie, Dawn of the Dead, and then it got remade into Dawn of the Dead, a different movie, the same, but and these are all like society breaks down in its entirety, and you have to like forge your personality and who you are anew and how you live, and so apocalypse fiction has been a thing since forever ago. Mary Shelley wrote the first like Last Man Alive novel that we can find, So surely things are changing and systems are crumbling, and it's really hard to get a grip on if that's more so than usual. It feels that way, but it's a little ambiguous. We'll never really know because it's really hard to like suss out how it felt in the 1920s, for instance, where things surely felt like they were changing fast.
Oh,
my grandfather lived through the first car and also the Ferrari, it's outrageous. Like his lifetime also saw the landing on the moon, which I forget when the Wright brothers first flew, but it was the last century sometime. Yeah,
it was 1902, 1901, 1903, somewhere in there,
so
where
right
the Wright brothers first flew. Yeah, and then within 60 years, we were on the moon after that first Wright brothers flight. It's wild stuff.
That's stunning. Like, so the apocalypse as a genre, I think, is super valuable. You should. It's part of like reconciling with the idea of your own death and like as a thing that is like overcomable. Even like the Christian apocalypse is not like the end of all things. It's the end of the world, but also then we continue on after that. Like it rebuilds. The flood of Noah was the end of the world, and ostensibly spawned the current world. All these apocalypses really are survivable, even though we think of them as like total annihilation. They annihilate some things.
I think also people relate to their own personal apocalypses, and that's why that is such a fascinating narrative. It's part of the hero's journey as well as this, like, there's the big death, and then there's the death of your
and the rebirth.
Life.
Anyone who's been through a brutal breakup knows exactly what these movies are about. There's so many versions of personal apocalypse. The feeling of having who you are crumbled. It can be losing something, or graduating from a beloved school, or the death of like a really, really present family member, or it can be anything, and just sort of like the reconciling that you are going to rebuild your entire person several times is super important and valuable. The first time you go through it, probably, even if you thought you were real ready for it, you probably were not. So it's a glorious life skill, and so watch your zombie movies, children.
That cuts to the heart of the tradition of magic, right? As understood in the Middle Ages. One of the most popular symbols of the magicians of the Middle Ages was the Ouroboros, which you all know is the snake that eats its own tail. Because of the snake is always, going back to Greek times, the snake is the symbol of wisdom because it sheds its own skin and can be spotted rebirthing like that. And as far as system failure goes at the societal level, we could talk about Marx's Capital Volume 1, published in the 1870s. And we could talk about the possibility that technology will replace labor. Labor won't be able to negotiate for enough money to buy back the products they're making, and so the capitalists won't have anyone to sell to. Or we can talk about Marx's Capital Volume 2 and 3, published posthumously in 1893, which go on to suggest that a falling rate of profit will mean that that whole scenario shows up in the financial markets first, and then we can talk about bond markets, or we could simply notice the tantalizing historical coincidences are piling up. I noticed that plagues are a big part of the fall of Rome, a big part of the fall of medieval society, and lo and behold, COVID-19 coming around. In the set, not COVID-19, not catastrophic from a death toll perspective, but a lot fewer people trust the authorities now than they did prior to COVID, and that's the thing that plagues do. They, rightly or wrongly, create doubt and plant seeds of doubts in people's minds about whether or not the emperor is naked. There's also the advent of new communications technology. The bound book gave the Christians a huge advantage in the late days of the Roman Empire, to the point where they it allowed them to take over the imperial government, and the Roman Catholic Church was born. Obviously, the printing press arrives in the late Middle Ages, and today we've got the internet. So I just like to point to historical coincidences like that to suggest that we are at a profound inflection point worthy of the fall of Rome, or the collapse of medieval society in the 1300s and the ensuing Italian Renaissance.
Yeah, it's so exciting to be bringing a baby into this.
Well, I mean, I think that raising a baby has always got to be a hair-raising project. But if you're an open-minded person, I think that is also a period of great opportunity. I'll just quote the T-Mac, the famed Terence McKenna, the famed ethnobotanist, who always said that during times of revolution, everyone knows that the cafes are open all night and there's dancing in the streets. I always liked that quote, because for most people, things get a lot better during times of revolution. Your average Italian farmer had a lot less produce he or she had to grow when Rome fell, right? Because now think of all the wagon loads of grain that no longer have to go to the capital. It's a lot less work for the peasants got a better deal after the fall of Rome, no question about it. All right. Well, have we got any more ruminations? Like I want to get all of this on record, and then 6 months from now, we'll find out how you all, if indeed there was an experience of ego death that comes with becoming a parent for the first time.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. Some of the it's all locked up in potential. There's only a couple of things that we know are coming. Like we expect to be extraordinarily tired for a very long time. And so kind of giving up on your sleep schedule is like a small taste of what's to come, I suppose. But you're going to reorganize what you consider to be comfort. So much of the comfort of my life is in the routines that I've developed for myself, and the pace at which I take in coffee, and the time that I set my alarm versus the time that I go to bed, are all personal choices that I'm about to lose. I will adapt to them as best I can.
I'm excited to see how our relationship evolves. We took a birthing class at my yoga studio, and the thing that I took away from that the most was that she was like, you are going to enter a period where it's not you against your husband. You are on a team, and the baby is the enemy. The baby needs to be conquered. Every day the baby needs to be conquered. And I'm looking forward to that journey where we find a new level of teamwork against our enemy, the baby.
Evil baby, yeah. And the baby's going to need to undergo a series of reconstructions at an incredible pace at first, and then it will slow down. And I have a little side theory that the tension between parents and adolescents comes from that slowing pace that you watch your child change and grow almost on a monthly basis, and learn to read and speak, and then to speak well, and then to read books that don't have pictures in them, and all of a sudden that slows way down in adolescence. And I mean, teens get grumpy or whatever. It's certainly a thing, but you get into a really good rhythm of breaking down and rebuilding your children, and forcing them to go outside or whatever. And then all of a sudden it's kind of a little out of your hands. School is so much babysitting. All of a sudden you only see your kids a couple hours a day instead of all day. And they're off your routine, and I think that is you get accustomed to a 7-year-old pretty quick, and an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old, and then all of a sudden you are no longer accustomed to them, and you are kind of in the business of rebuilding your own life, because probably at 18 they will leave the nest, and
one would hope, ideally.
And even if they live in the mother-in-law apartment, then you're still trying to both have your own lives and motivations and interests again. And the post-child adult is a brand new person, and I don't know what lessons you take from parenthood into being an individual again, but I don't know. We'll see. There's a lot of interesting phases to come, and I'll probably be real tired next time we speak.
Well, Velda, I think that sounds great. I look forward to convincing you all to come back on this podcast and give us the updates from the other side.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm so surprised that we've gotten this far and talked about Star Wars and the hero's journey and the Messiah story arc, and that you, Jason, have not mentioned Dune.
Well, we'll need another episode for Dune. Dune is a hero's journey told through the lens of like politics and religion and the interplay between them without any particular judgment on it.
And Star Wars is heavily inspired by it.
Star Wars. That was one of the things I did not mention when I mentioned the origin of Star Wars earlier.
Star Wars is 25% Dune, especially that first one. Yeah, no, read your Dune. That's crazy important. And if you absolutely can, please read the subsequent 5 novels.
So noted. Brian, have you got any final thoughts before we sign off here?
No.
Alrighty. Well, I will just say then, by way of a final thought, that much to my regret, Jason, during our childhood, I was your bully for a lot of it, and I held you back when I should have been lifting you up. So from my perspective, there is a certain poetry to seeing you cross the bridge into adulthood first, and I hope you can understand that. Congratulations to both of you. Outstanding.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and thanks for having me on.
All right.
Thanks.
Alrighty, folks. Well, this is usually the moment when I encourage everyone to send us an email at nop@substack.com and let us know what you think of the content you heard today, and or put any questions to us. We'll be sure to read it on the air. And secondly, if you'd like to receive your weekly system failure essays into your email inbox, you can accomplish that at nop.substack.com, and you can also read our archive of previous essays which come out, of course, every week on Monday. And with that, intrepid system failure listeners, we bid you a fantastic week, and I will be back on Thursday with this week's essay read. So long, everyone.
All right, see you.